Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Voices of Sample Management. Today, I have a long-term colleague from the world of sample management, Stuart Naylor. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I guess I've been in the industry for 25 years or so. It's flown by. I started out working for a company called the Technology Partnership, which metamorphosized into SPT LabTech. I had an awful lot to do with their compound storage system called Compound. Did a stint with Texel, who ended up becoming Hamilton Storage. And since 2008, I've been running my own business called Roylan Developments. And we make, I guess, pertinent to the topic of this conversation, nitrogen storage systems for compound management, which do a pretty good job of keeping moisture out of samples.
Thank you very much. So yes, the topic of today is, how the impact of DMSO on our wonderful small molecule integrity, mainly small molecules. But I think we should probably just start with DMSO. It's known by some as the universal solvent because it dissolves both polar and non-polar samples quite nicely. But can you explain what's so special about DMSO other than its solubility abilities?
Well, as you say, it's the universal solvent. Practically every lab uses it to solubilize their compound collections, and provided it's free of moisture, it does a very, very good job of that.
So why does it absorb moisture so readily, I suppose? Is it part of its structure that helps that, or?
I think so, yes.
I suspect there's a lot of hydrogen bonds in the DMSO, isn't there? Which is what water likes to combine with.
Yes. So yeah, and it makes it aggressively hygroscopic.
Yes.
I remember back when I first came into the industry, I did an experiment where I took a glass beaker and filled it up with a quantity of DMSO. And stood that on a scale and left it for 24 hours and came back, and it had gained about 20% weight, just sucking moisture in from the atmosphere, and then came back another day later, and I think it had gone up to more like 33%. Which over a 1 to 2 day period is obviously a huge change in what was in that beaker.
And that's a beaker of DMSO, so that had sort of a large volume, whereas small wells in a plate probably have a worse surface area to volume ratio, so it's even quicker with smaller samples.
Yeah, but then even more incredibly, I guess, than that. There have been a number of customers that I visited over the years that have been using sealed plates. There was one in particular, I remember, early on in my time in the industry that was actually using sealed deep well blocks. And they were investigating into the contents of them. And bear in mind, these are sealed polypropylene containers. And they were finding that the wells around the outside of the plate had actually gained significant volume, and particularly the corner wells. And what they were finding, and this has since been looked at in various studies, that polypropylene is actually quite porous.
Right.
Combined with that aggressive hygroscopic nature of DMSO, over time it will actually suck moisture in through the sidewall of your plastic container. Obviously, that takes quite some time, but then some of these samples can be stored for quite some time.
Wow.
And I think the picture that I remember most was on a few of these deep well blocks. the foil seal had actually busted off in a few of the corners due to the sheer amount of moisture that had got in.
Wow, that's it's almost like a gone off bottle of wine or something. The cork blows up.
Yeah, totally.
Wow. So yes, so obviously water gets absorbed into DMSO quite readily, at least to the 30% factor, and then things slightly change because the phases of the mixture change slightly. But what effect does that have on the precious potential new drugs that are dissolved in that DMSO?
Well,
that have an effect?
It can have a few, I guess, several effects, and when you put them all together, it can be quite bad. But running through them, I mean, one of the easy ones is dilution.
The volume's gone up, so it's not the concentration you thought it was.
So if you've had your sample diluted to, say, a 70% DMSO concentration, with the rest being water or moisture that's ingressed, obviously that's a chunk of dilution off the bat. But I would say worse than that is you don't need much moisture absorption into your DMSO for its solubilizing capabilities to start getting depressed. And that really accelerates the more the moisture gets in. Again, using this sort of 70% DMSO purity level, at that point, nominally, you've slightly more than halved the solubilizing capability of DMSO.
And that will be different from between molecule and molecule you're trying to solubilize, but yeah, as an overall effect, that's quite marked, isn't it? Things will start falling out of solution into the bottom of the tube.
Yeah. And then if you're into freezing your compounds, that's where the effect of freeze-thaw cycles really become damaging, as that moisture absorption has taken effect. Obviously, the freezing points of water and DMSO are slightly different. You can get these crystallization effects as your solution starts to freeze, which again can become damaging to your compounds. But if you put that effect to one side for a moment and just look at the first two, let's say that you lose about half the compound in your well to precipitation.
Yeah.
And then you've had about 30% dilution. When you actually look at what you're going to be petting out sample-wise to go into an assay, it's kind of a mile away from really where you really want it to be.
Yeah, definitely non-ideal. Experimental error coming in for. I suppose that's one argument maybe for using fresh samples each time. You go neat, solubilize the DMSO, and then use straight away. You're cutting down that time for hydration. But most research companies don't make an awful lot of samples, so that would be quite wasteful in chemistry time to make enough bulk in order to go that way.
Yeah,
but you can see the advantage maybe when maybe in the clinical study area you can get away with that sort of thing, but in the discovery area where amounts of small molecules isn't very high, you're always going to be solubilizing and then keeping that sample of solute for a while at least.
Yeah, well, the approach that you mentioned is one way of dealing with it, but there are some other methods, and that would be to just try and stop the moisture getting into the DMSO in the first place, or even, and it's probably a talking point for a future podcast, using a method to take that moisture back out of the DMSO.
So you're recovering the water and hopefully recovering your small molecules back into solution.
Yeah.
That'd be a good topic. Yes. So I suppose we've talked about the freeze-thaw cycles may be affecting the solubility further, but also, you know, the chemical structure of your small molecule, which can be quite complex at times, and maybe not the most stable molecule because it's still a research sample. What, you know, is there also decomposition of the small molecule caused by the fact that non-ideal DMSO solute and freeze-thaw cycles affecting the chemistry?
That absolutely happens. I mean, there are unfortunately some compounds that will break down no matter what you do, given enough time.
Yes.
But yes, the effect that you just mentioned is very real, and another one to worry about. So I guess that's, you know, a fourth issue to consider.
Yes. So basically, DMSO and water you don't mix until you want to mix it. So I suppose in your cell assay you do want to mix DMSO with water, but that's at the final stage of the process, rather than at the beginning stage of the process. So I suppose, different ways of well, I'm just thinking one of the other systems that I think has this effect of DMSO is, you know, the world of discovery has been, especially in the assay world, has been taken over by acoustic dispensers by a small company called Beckman, and they, well, didn't used to be Beckman, but anyway, there's another story. But the liquid class, if you like, of a 100% DMSO acoustically sample is different from a 70% DMSO sample. So, you know, you know, your amounts being transferred to, you know, can change as well depending on how much hydration of your DMSO you've had.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I remember when the Echo first came along, sold by LabSite as it then was, and it was just a revolutionary piece of equipment. You know, the sales of it just really accelerated off the bat. I don't know how many are out there now in use, but it's got to be in the thousands.
Yeah. Yes.
And you know, it allowed companies to hugely minimize what they were doing, shrink their library size, the amounts of labware that they were using, reformat down into higher density formats. But it also had this feature which was completely new, where you could accurately survey your compound collections in your storage plates and be told what the difference was between the DMSO and the moisture content.
Yes.
And whilst before that, you know, it was certainly in the bigger pharma widely known that moisture absorption was bad, it made that information available to a much broader audience.
Yes.
As you say, though, in terms of moisture absorption being bad, as that occurs in echo plates, it can start to throw that dispensing off a bit.
Yes.
And not with the very latest generation of echo, but all the legacy echoes that are out there, of which there are many. Once you drop below that 70% DMSO purity level, the dispenser will actually stop firing.
Yes.
Yeah, which is another huge reason to try and keep moisture out of your plates.
Yes, and I think, you know, LabSite Beckman have realised this problem because, of course, you know, even if you are keeping your samples in a dry store somewhere, and I'm sure we'll come on to automation systems and manual systems soon, but their cabinets of their latest systems, you know, are built to have dry air blown through them, so even when the plate is exposed, it's kept in a dry environment, or a better dry environment, maybe not perfect, but it's you know, they're trying to minimize that moisture uptake in their systems as well. So.
Yeah, well, and this is a game of trying to do whatever you can where you can.
Yes.
I mean, if you assume for one moment that you've got your plate stored in the perfect environment, and we can maybe come on to what that might look like as we progress in this podcast. At some point, you've got to take those samples out to use them.
Yes.
And so it follows, no matter what you do, over time, you are going to have some level of progressive moisture absorption.
I suppose, does it make a difference where you are in the world as well? Because some places are more moist than others.
I mean, we've got one customer in particular in Helsinki in Finland.
Right.
And in the middle of winter, when it gets absolutely freezing out there, it just sucks all the moisture out of the air.
Right. Okay.
And they really don't have much problem at all with moisture absorption. It occurs, but it's at a heavily reduced rate. Whereas when they go to summer and things warm up, humidity levels at ambient can be 50% plus. Actually, they see some quite aggressive moisture absorption. Another customer that I remember, I guess I can mention their name because they don't exist as that anymore. But in years gone by, there was a company called Tripos in Tucson, Arizona, which is a very arid, dry environment. And again, whilst they did see some moisture absorption, it was far, far lower than most other areas in the United States.
Right. Yeah. So it's almost, if you're a Scandinavian company, then you need to do all your small molecule assays over winter and not during the summer.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they have such long summer holidays.
Yeah. Well, then another thing to think about is really wherever you are in the world, if your building has HVAC managing the environment, so that's full environmental control. Most HVAC systems are set so that they'll have a 50 to 60% relative humidity level. And that's for human being comfort, so your lips don't start cracking or things like that if the air is way, way dry. But the downside of that in a lab is that's at a humidity level where moisture absorption will just happen with gay abandon.
So they're almost pumping in moisture.
In
a modern
quite
building.
literally.
Yes. There's a thought for people designing labs in the future. I suppose we've talked a little about the echo measuring hydration. Are there any other? I mean, I suppose there must have been classical ways other than you putting your DMSO beaker on a weighing balance. But are there other ways to measure without having to buy a fairly expensive?
If you look way back into the past, I'm not so sure, and that probably some of that is to do with when I came into the industry. But in more recent times, another method was this tube dowser that Xiaf launched.
Right.
Albeit that's only for tubes. If you're wanting to look at what's going on in a plate, then really it's the echo or nothing else.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I suppose the obvious thing to do is make sure you haven't got any moisture where you're storing your samples, and I suppose in things like you talked about the SPT compound stores and the Hamilton devices, etc. They all use compressed gases. I would say compressed air is what you would expect it to be being used, but I suppose there's a push not to use that within.
I mean, you've mentioned a couple of options there. There's another one, a CRO that I know that's actually using a Cardex system for storage. So they're picking manually,
right?
And in that case, they're just flooding the room with dehumidified air.
Right. Okay.
So not as good as inert environments, which in most cases are nitrogen. You can also go to the dehumidified air route. Some people that come and talk to us will sometimes ask about argon. That is another option.
Bit more expensive, I would have thought.
Well, but honestly, I wouldn't advise it. I mean, yes, there's the expense of the gas, hugely more expensive than nitrogen.
Yeah.
But actually, of more concern than that is its asphyxiation risk.
Yes.
It's a gas that will, if I had a pipe here and released a load down onto the floor next to where I'm sitting, it would just stay there. It clears incredibly slowly. And so certainly here with what we do, we view it as somewhat of a dangerous gas, particularly if you're needing to shift a fair amount through a storage system to get the conditions that you want. And we've actually refused to sell systems to customers that want to use argon.
Right. Okay. Very wise.
For that safety reason.
Yes. Yeah. Once you open the big door, then you're suddenly flooding your lab with argon, aren't you? Yes. Yeah. Not ideal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose flooding an automated store or even a manual store with dry air, and then I suppose we need to come on to your product. I suppose you're not at the auto store area. You're much more in the manual zone, but that's where an awful lot of small molecules are still stored, even within the big pharma world. I'll let you do a little bit of sales pitch, but I'm more interested in why does it work? What's the technology?
So we make products called storage pods. This is a small one here. This lid can be removed. There we go. Let me undo these latches. So there's a drawer in here in which you can place plates or tube racks.
Okay, yeah.
And then you can seal this shut. You can see a couple of fittings here on the front.
Yeah.
And we'll then flush out this environment with nitrogen.
Right.
We've got two different what we call controller options. So they're like the benchtop box that controls the gas flushing. We've got one controller that will flush a single storage pod. You disconnect from it, and then you can flush the next storage pod and the next one and the next one. And then we have a much more advanced product called multipod that can do all this small storage pod flushing. But it can also be permanently connected to up to 20 big storage pods that will hold like 250 plates each and continually monitor the environments.
So is it important to keep changing the nitrogen within the pod? I mean, do you once a day, whatever?
Come on to that. So obviously what we're doing is creating a sealed environment, and we were talking about the risks of moisture ingressing through plastics. This is a metal construction, so once it's sealed shut, nothing's getting in, nothing's getting out. And so with the smaller storage pods, over time what we've learned is you just need to flush it and then you can leave it.
Okay.
We've got customers doing that for extended periods of time, like over a year plus.
So that's very different from going back to the automated store environment, which is just flushing the environment all the time and using nitrogen all the time.
You've got to be careful with that because even DMSO can evaporate if the conditions are dry enough. So there's a 40% difference in what's called the vapor pressure between DMSO and water.
Right.
And that's the point at which things want to evaporate. Conveniently, it's in favour of water wanting to evaporate first. So water's 40 more times willing to evaporate than DMSO. But if conditions are dry enough, and we've seen this with our multi-pod product where a customer's totally overcooked the settings, you can get DMSO to evaporate as well.
Okay, so you do actually have to be lenient with your flushing.
Well, you need, I think, with any storage system that uses inert gas, if the system allows, you need to be sensible with the environmental settings.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. I did not know that. So that's
with the multi-pod product that I mentioned, where it's continually monitoring these bigger storage pods and topping it up, there the situation is slightly different. And rather than going down to a really low level of oxygen and moisture content, which is what we do with these smaller pods, we'll run it at a slightly higher level, where we've found empirically it's dry enough that you're really keeping moisture away from the samples. And if there is some moisture in the samples, very gently over time, the system will start taking it out. But not so dry that you're getting into the realms of risking evaporating DMSO.
Right. Okay. Cool. Wow. Well, I've learned a lot today. So, is there any wrap-ups you want to mention?
Actually, there is one other thing that I thought of, because it was sitting on top of the tube rack that I picked up to show our storage pod. One other thing that's out there that can help with reducing moisture absorption is the LabSite or Beckram microclimate lid. Okay. I've got one here that a customer gave me. It's, I don't know if you can see in the camera, but it's got this layer of foam inside.
Yep.
And it's designed, let me get my plate back, designed to sit on top of a microplate. And this can provide a somewhat short-term barrier for moisture absorption into your plate. So the idea here is that you add a certain amount of DMSO into the lid, which gets soaked up into this absorbent foam. And if the plate's exposed, say it's going through a robotic system where you've got lids on top of all of your plates, the DMSO in the lid will absorb moisture first.
Right, protecting
so
yourself.
It will, in effect, delay the time to the samples in the plates starting to get exposed to moisture absorption. It's a really simple idea, but it does have a positive effect. And again, coming back to the comment I made, this game is about doing what you can, where you can, to reduce that moisture absorption. This is quite a handy step if you're doing plate processing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. A plug for Beckman as well. Okay.
I'll invoice them at the end of the month, Toby.
Yes. So, yeah, thank you very much for speaking. I think we are probably going to do a follow-up podcast when some new data is coming out with one of your partners, I believe. So I look forward to that as well. But Stuart, thank you very much for joining us.
No worries, a pleasure.
Thank you.
Look forward to talking next time.
Yes, indeed. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And thank you everybody for listening in. Thank you.